The rain in New York didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker, turning the city into a blurred watercolor of gray steel and charcoal asphalt. Elias Thorne stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of the penthouse on Fifth Avenue, looking down at the umbrellas blooming like black poppies on the sidewalk below. The glass was cold against his forehead. Behind him, the low murmur of the post-funeral reception hummed, a polite, stifled noise like the sound of expensive fabric rubbing against itself. "You should eat something, Eli." The voice was familiar, warm, and practiced. Elias didn't turn around immediately. He watched a drop of condensation trace a jagged path down the pane before he shifted his gaze to Julian. Julian Banks looked exactly how a best friend was supposed to look at a funeral: solemn, supportive, and impeccably dressed. His navy suit was cut sharp enough to draw blood, and his hand, currently resting on Elias's shoulder, felt heavy. "I'm not hungry," Eli said, his voice raspy. He hadn't spoken much in 48 hours. "I just want everyone to leave." Did he really know this many people? Silas Thorne didn't know people, Julian corrected gently, handing Elias a tumbler of amber liquid. He owned people, or he bought them. These are just investments paying their respects. Elias took the glass, but didn't drink. He looked across the expansive living room, a space that felt more like a museum than a home. Modern art, sharp angles, aggressive colors hung on the walls. It was a cold space for a cold man. His father, Silas, had died as he lived, alone in a room full of expensive things. Elias felt a phantom ache in his chest, not quite grief, but the hollow space where grief should have been. "Where is she?" Elias asked. Julian's eyes flickered, a micro-expression, gone before Elias could fully register it. "Elena? She's over by the bar, talking to the Arts Council chair. She's doing her best, Eli. She's trying to secure your legacy, or, well, manage the optics." Elias looked towards the bar. Elena stood there, a silhouette of grace in a black dress that was modest, yet devastatingly fitted. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe chignon that highlighted the delicate curve of her neck. She looked beautiful, and she looked completely unreachable. "She hasn't touched me in weeks," Elias murmured, more to the glass of whiskey than to Julian. Julian's grip on his shoulder tightened slightly. "She's stressed, man. You know how she gets. The art gallery opening, the pressure, and now this." Silas wasn't exactly an easy father-in-law. His passing, it complicates things for everyone.
"It shouldn't," Elias said, taking a harsh sip of the whiskey. It burned, grounding him. "I didn't want his money when he was alive. I don't want his ghost now. I just want to go home, to our apartment. I want to order takeout and sleep for a week." "You're an architect, Eli," Julian said, his tone shifting to that pragmatic venture capitalist pitch Elias had known since college. "You build structures. You understand foundations. Right now, the foundation is shaking. You need to let the dust settle before you try to build anything new. Let Elena handle the social aspect. I'll handle the press. You just exist." Elias turned to his friend. Julian was handsome in a way Elias never was. Where Elias was rough edges and quiet observation, Julian was polish and projection. They had been inseparable since their freshman year at Yale. Julian had been the shield, Elias the sword that never left the scabbard. "Thank you, Jules," Elias said, feeling a surge of genuine gratitude. "I don't know what I'd do without you right now." "Don't be stupid," Julian smiled, a tight, controlled expression. "We're brothers. Brothers look out for each other." Across the room, Elena turned. Her gaze locked with Julian's for a second, just a fraction of a heartbeat too long, before sliding to Elias. There was no warmth in her eyes. There was pity, perhaps, and something else, something darker, like the shadow of a bird passing over a grave. She excused herself from the Arts Council chair and walked toward them. The crowd parted for her. She moved with a fluid precision, the click of her heels swallowed by the thick Persian rugs. "The car's ready for you, Elias," she said. She didn't reach for his hand. She clasped her own hands in front of her, clutching her clutch bag like a shield. "I think we should go. You look exhausted, Elias." "I was just telling Julian I wanted to leave," Elias said, stepping toward her. He instinctively reached out to brush a stray lock of hair from her temple. Elena flinched. It was subtle, a slight recoil, a stiffening of the neck, but to Elias it felt like a slap. He froze, his hand hovering in the air between them, suspended in the electric tension of the room. "Sorry," Elena whispered, her voice brittle. "My head. I have a migraine. The noise." "It's okay," Elias said, dropping his hand. He felt a cold knot form in his stomach, heavier than the whiskey. "Let's go home." I think I'm going to stay at the gallery tonight, Elias," she said, avoiding his eyes. She looked at Julian, then back at the floor. "I have inventory to check before the morning shipment, and honestly, I need some space to process. You understand, don't you?" Elias stared at her. His father was dead. He was standing in a room full of strangers, and his wife wanted to sleep at her office. "Elena," Elias said, his voice low, "I need you tonight." "Don't make this harder than it is," she snapped, her veneer of composure cracking for an instant. She took a breath, smoothing her dress. "Please, Elias, just for tonight. Julian can drive you home." Elias looked at Julian. The best friend gave a small, helpless shrug, as if to say, "Women, what can you do?" "I'll make sure he gets home safe, Elle," Julian said softly. "Go do what you need to do." "Thank you," she said. She looked at Julian with an intensity that made the air in the room feel suddenly thin. "Thank you for everything." She turned and walked away without looking back at her husband. Elias watched her go, the heavy oak doors of the penthouse closed with a final, resonant thud. He felt a strange vibration in his pocket, his phone. He ignored it. He felt untethered, drifting in the high-altitude silence of the penthouse. "Come on," Julian said, clapping him on the back a little too hard. "Let's get you out of here. My driver is downstairs." As they walked toward the elevator, Elias cast one last look at his father's portrait hanging over the mantel. The old man's eyes seemed to follow him, mocking, filled with knowledge Elias hadn't yet grasped. "You think you're free," the portrait seemed to say. "You have no idea what it costs to be a thorn." Elias stepped into the elevator, the metal doors sliding shut, trapping him with his best friend and the suffocating realization that the loneliness he felt wasn't because of the death, it was because the people still alive had already left him.
The silence in the apartment was different from the silence in Silas Thorne's penthouse. In the penthouse, the silence was vast, expensive, and indifferent. Here, in the two-bedroom loft in Brooklyn that Elena and Elias had shared for 5 years, the silence was heavy. It felt like a physical weight pressing against the exposed brick walls, suffocating the air out of the room. 3 days had passed since the funeral. 3 days of rain, of takeout containers stacking up in the recycling bin, and of Elena sleeping in the guest room. She claimed it was out of respect for his mourning, that he needed space to decompress without her tossing and turning beside him. Elias had accepted the excuse because he was too exhausted to dissect it, but the distance between them felt like a canyon that was widening by the hour. Elias sat at the kitchen island, staring at the steam rising from a mug of black coffee. It was 8 a.m. on a Tuesday. Usually the apartment would be a flurry of motion, Elena rushing to find her portfolio, Elias checking blueprints. Today, the air was stagnant. Elena walked into the kitchen. She was already dressed, a sharp gray blazer over a silk camisole, her makeup flawless. She looked like she was armored for battle. She didn't look at him. She went straight to the refrigerator, pulling out a bottle of sparkling water. "We need to talk, Elias." She didn't sit down. She leaned against the counter, creating a deliberate distance. Her knuckles were white around the bottle. Elias looked up, his eyes gritty from lack of sleep. "I know. I was thinking we could go upstate this weekend. Just us. Get away from the city, away from the lawyers and the estate nonsense. We haven't had a weekend in months." Elena closed her eyes for a brief second, a pained expression crossing her face. "I'm not talking about a vacation, Elias." She set the water down.
The clink of glass on granite sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "I can't do this anymore," she said. Her voice was steady, rehearsed. "This. Us. The marriage." Elias blinked, the words taking a moment to penetrate the fog of his grief. "What? Elena, my father just died. I know I've been distant, but it's not about your father," she interrupted, her voice rising slightly. She crossed her arms, a defensive posture. "This has been coming for a long time, since before he got sick. You're stuck, Elias. You're happy being a mid-level architect at a firm that doesn't appreciate you. You have no ambition to be anything more than what you are right now." "I thought you loved who I was," Elias said, his voice quiet. The suddenness of the attack left him reeling. "We built this life together. We're comfortable." "Comfortable is a slow death," Elena shot back, her eyes flashing with frustration he hadn't realized she was harboring. "I'm surrounded by people who are changing the world, who are building empires, and I come home to this, to mediocrity. I want more, Elias. I need a partner who challenges me, not one I have to drag along."
Elias stared at her. This wasn't the woman he married. This was a stranger speaking in headlines and buzzwords. Is this about money? Because, it's not about money, she lied. The swiftness of her denial was a tell. It's about mindset. We're on different paths. I filed the papers, Elias. They'll be sent to you later today. She pushed herself off the counter, grabbing her purse. I'm staying at a hotel tonight. I'll send movers for my things next week. Elena, stop. Elias stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You're walking out now? Without even trying to fix this? There's nothing to fix, she said, her hand on the doorknob. She looked back at him one last time. Her expression wasn't angry anymore. It was pitiable. You're a good man, Elias, but you're not the man I need. The door clicked shut. Elias stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen. The silence rushed back in, louder than before. He felt a strange numbness spreading through his limbs. It wasn't heartbreak yet. It was shock. The timing was so cruel it felt surgical. He sank back onto the stool, putting his head in his hands. He needed to call Julian. Julian would know what to do. Julian would talk sense into her, or at least help Elias navigate the wreckage. He reached for his phone on the counter, but knocked over the stack of mail Elena had left there. Underneath the envelopes was her iPad. She had forgotten it in her haste. The screen lit up. A notification. Elias stared at it. He knew the passcode, their anniversary. He shouldn't look. He should respect her privacy. But the words she had just said, I need a partner who challenges me, echoed in his mind with a suspicious resonance. It sounded like something someone else would say. His finger hovered over the screen. Then he swiped. The iPad unlocked. It was open to her iMessage app. The thread at the top wasn't labeled with a name, just an initial. J. Elias felt his heart hammer against his ribs. He tapped the thread. Today, 7:45 a.m. J. Just do it fast. Don't let him drag it out. Elena. I'm doing it now. I feel sick. J. Focus on us. Focus on the penthouse view next month. He's dead weight, Elle. You know that. Elena. He's going to be broken. His dad just died. J. He was broken before that. He just didn't know it. I'll pick you up at the corner. Love you. Elias read the messages 3 times. The words swam before his eyes. The penthouse view. Dead weight. Love you. He scrolled up. The history went back months. Photos of them at dinners Elias wasn't invited to. Complaints about Elias's boring nature. Julian mocking Elias's cheap suits. Elena complaining about Elias's sexual performance. And then a message from the night of the funeral reception. Jay. He looked like a lost puppy tonight. It's almost sad. Did you see him trying to hold your hand? Elena. Stop. I just want this over. I want to be with a real man. Someone like you. Elias dropped the iPad on the counter. It landed with a flat thud. The room spun. The betrayal wasn't a sharp knife. It was a blunt object, bludgeoning him repeatedly. Julian, his brother, the man who had poured him a drink and held his shoulder 3 days ago while mocking him behind his back? He walked to the sink and gripped the edge until his knuckles turned white. He didn't scream, he didn't throw anything. He just stood there breathing in the stale air of the life he thought he had. A deep, cold clarity began to settle over him, freezing the tears before they could form. They thought he was weak. They thought he was mediocre. They thought he was dead weight. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was the attorney's office. "Mr. Thorne," the secretary's voice was professional and crisp, "we have the reading of the will scheduled for tomorrow morning at 10. It is imperative you attend alone. Your father left specific instructions." "I'll be there," Elias said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, hollow, stripped of emotion. "Is everything all right, sir?" Elias looked at the iPad, the screen now dark, hiding the digital evidence of his life's destruction. "Yes," Elias said. "Everything is perfectly clear now." He hung up. He walked over to the iPad, turned it off completely, and placed it gently in the drawer where they kept the takeout menus. He wouldn't confront them yet, not today. If they wanted him to be the fool, he would play the fool. For a little while longer.
The offices of Vance, Sterling, and Moore smelled of mahogany polish and old money. It was a scent Elias associated with his childhood, the smell of waiting in hallways while his father dismantled competitors behind closed doors. Arthur Vance sat behind a desk that looked large enough to land a small aircraft on. He was a man carved from granite, with silver hair and eyes that had seen every loophole in New York state law. He didn't offer condolences. He offered a seat. "Your father was a complicated man, Elias," Vance said, sliding a thick leather-bound folder across the desk. The room was dim, lit only by the banker's lamp and the gray daylight filtering through the blinds. He didn't believe in handouts. He believed in tests. Elias sat stiffly, his hands folded in his lap to hide their trembling. The image of the text messages, dead weight, was still burned into his retinas. "I'm not here for money, Arthur. If he left it to charity, I'm fine with that." "He didn't leave it to charity," Vance said dryly. He opened the folder. Silas liquidated 80% of his overseas holdings 2 months before he died. He consolidated the domestic real estate portfolio. He cleaned the house. Vance pushed a single sheet of paper forward. The total valuation of the estate, after taxes and debt settlement, sits at $518 million, including the controlling interest in Thorne Developments. Elias stared at the number. It sat there, on the white paper, innocuous and terrifying. $518 million. The air left his lungs. "Why?" Elias whispered. "We haven't spoken in 3 years. He hated my career. He hated my choices." "He respected that you walked away," Vance corrected. "He told me once, the boy has a spine, he just doesn't know how to use it yet. He wanted to make sure you didn't come back for the money until you were ready, or until he was gone." Vance leaned forward, his expression hardening. "But there is a condition, a quiet period clause. The transfer of assets enters a probation trust for 30 days. During this time, the estate is sealed. If you reveal the extent of this inheritance to any third party, media, spouse, creditors, before the probate period ends, the trust dissolves and the money goes to the Audubon Society. Silas wanted to ensure you weren't surrounded by opportunists." Opportunists. The word hung in the air. Elias thought of Elena packing her bags. He thought of Julian's bad investments mentioned in the news recently. If they knew, if Elena knew she was walking away from $500 million, she wouldn't leave. She would stay. She would pretend to love him again. And Julian would be there, smiling, siphoning off the wealth like a parasite. A cold, dark realization washed over Elias. The money wasn't just a gift. It was a weapon. But only if he kept the safety on. "I understand," Elias said. His voice was steady, steadier than it had been in days. "No one knows? Only you and I. To the world, the estate is tied up in litigation and debt. That is the narrative we have prepared. Keep it that way."
Elias said, standing up. He didn't feel like the man that had walked in. He felt heavier, yet strangely anchored. I have some paperwork of my own to finish.
2 hours later, Elias sat at the dining table in the Brooklyn loft. The divorce papers lay between them. Alina sat opposite him. She had been crying, or at least her eyes were red enough to suggest it. It was a performance, Elias realized. He watched her with a detachment that frightened him. He was looking at her through the lens of a microscope, seeing the bacteria under the beauty. "I didn't want it to end like this, Elias," she said, her voice trembling. She pushed a pen toward him. "But we have to be realistic. You can keep the apartment. It's in your name anyway. I just want my personal effects and the savings account to cover my transition." The savings account had $40,000 in it. It was everything they had. "You want the savings," Elias repeated. "I have to put a deposit down on a new place," she said, her eyes pleading. Julian is helping me look, but I need my own independence. You have your job, you'll be fine." Julian is helping me look. The lie was so brazen, it almost made him laugh. She was moving in with Julian. They were going to use his savings to fund their new life while Julian's venture capital firms circled the drain. Elias picked up the pen. It was a cheap plastic ballpoint, promotional swag from a hardware store. If he told her right now, "I just inherited $500 million, the pen would drop from her hand. The tears would dry. The love would return. He could buy her affection back. He could crush Julian with his wallet. But he didn't want to buy her. He wanted to be rid of her. He looked at the woman he had vowed to love forever. He saw the greed hidden behind the sorrow. He saw the contempt she held for his mediocrity. "Okay," Elias said softly. "Okay?" Elena blinked, surprised by the lack of fight. "You take the savings, I keep the loft. We waive spousal support." He flipped to the last page. "Elias, are you sure?" Elena asked, a flicker of guilt or perhaps suspicion crossing her face. "You don't have to decide right now. You're emotional." "I'm not emotional, Elena," he said, looking her dead in the eye. "I'm practical. You said I needed to be more ambitious. Maybe you were right. Maybe I need a clean slate." He pressed the pen to the paper. The scratch of the ink was the only sound in the room. He signed his name, Elias Thorne. With that signature, he severed the legal tie. He also secured his fortune. By signing the divorce decree before the inheritance was public, the assets were his alone. New York was an equitable distribution state, but not for assets acquired after the filing or for inheritances kept separate. By leaving now, she was securing her own poverty. He pushed the papers back to her. "You are free," he said. Elena took the papers, visibly relieved. She stood up, clutching them like a prize. "Thank you, Elias. I know this is hard. Someday you'll see it's for the best." "I'm sure I will," he said. She hesitated, then leaned in and kissed him on the cheek. Her lips were cold. "Take care of yourself." She walked out the door. Elias listened to her footsteps fade down the hallway. He heard the elevator ding. He heard the doors slide shut. He waited 1 minute, 2 minutes. Then he stood up and walked to the window. Down on the street, he saw Elena emerge. A black sedan was waiting. Julian was leaning against the hood, looking impatient. Elias watched as Elena ran to him. Julian didn't hug her. He opened the back door and gestured for her to get in, checking his watch. They were already moving on to the next thing. Elias took his phone out of his pocket. He dialed Vance's number. "It's done," Elias said into the receiver. "The papers?" "Everything," Elias replied. He watched the black sedan merge into traffic, disappearing into the gray city. "Initiate the transfer, Arthur, and find me a real estate agent. I'm done with Brooklyn." "Where are you looking to move, Mr. Thorne?" Elias looked at the reflection of his own eyes in the window. They looked different. Colder, sharper. "Manhattan," Elias said. "Somewhere high up. Somewhere they can see, but can't touch." The sound of a life being dismantled was surprisingly similar to the sound of packing tape ripping off a dispenser. A sharp screeching tear followed by a flat, final thud. Elias stood in the corner of the Brooklyn loft, watching the movers Elena had hired. They were efficient, indifferent men in blue coveralls who handled the artifacts of his marriage: the throw pillows, the espresso machine, the framed prints of Paris, like they were handling industrial waste. Elena wasn't there. She had sent a text saying she couldn't get off work, but Elias knew she simply didn't have the stomach to watch the erasure of their history. "That the last of it, boss?" one of the movers asked, wiping sweat from his forehead with a dirty rag. "Yeah, that's the last of it." The apartment was now a skeleton. Without the furniture, the flaws were exposed. The water stain on the ceiling that used to joke was shaped like Italy. The scuff marks on the floorboards from the time they tried to learn salsa dancing in the kitchen. It looked small. It looked cheap. Elias placed his set of keys on the granite counter. He didn't look back. He grabbed his single duffel bag containing only his laptop, a few changes of clothes, and his father's watch, and walked out. He didn't lock the door. It wasn't his home anymore. An hour later, the elevator doors opened directly into the foyer of the penthouse at the Obsidian, one of the most exclusive residential towers on Billionaire's Row. This was his father's fortress. Now, legally, it was his cage. The air inside was different here, filtered, climate-controlled to a precise 70 degrees, and scented faintly of cedar and old leather. It was quiet, in a way that Brooklyn never was. In Brooklyn, silence was just a pause between noises. Here, silence was a heavy physical presence, insulated by 3 feet of concrete and triple-paned glass. "Welcome home, Mr. Thorne." Elias started. A man stood by the entrance to the main salon. He was in his 60s, wearing a suit that cost more than Elias's car, with posture so straight it looked painful. "Marcus," Elias said, recognizing his father's house manager. "I didn't know you were still on staff." "Mr. Vance informed me of the transition. The staff has been retained per the terms of the trust. Your father's suite has been prepared, though I assumed you might prefer the guest wing." "No," Elias said, dropping his duffel bag on a marble console table. The sound echoed. "I'll take the master suite. If I'm going to live in his shadow, I might as well sleep in his bed." "Very good, sir. Dinner will be served at 8. I took the liberty of canceling your father's scheduled appointments, but the tailor is coming tomorrow morning at 9. "Tailor?" "Mr. Vance's instructions. He suggested that your current wardrobe might not be congruent with your new position as chairman." Marcus's eyes flicked momentarily to Elias's worn corduroy jacket, then back to his face. There was no judgment, only observation. Elias walked to the massive window overlooking Central Park. The city was a grid of lights below him, a sprawling circuit board of energy. From up here, the people were invisible. The taxis were just yellow pixels. He felt a strange sensation in his chest, the vertigo of elevation. He was $20 million of real estate above the pavement where he had stood just this morning. "Elias," Elias said, not turning around. "Sir?" "Get rid of everything in the closet. All of his suits. All of it. If the tailor's coming, we start from scratch. Consider it done." Across the city, in a trendy, exposed brick apartment in Tribeca, the atmosphere was less serene. Julian kicked the door shut with his heel, balancing 3 bags of Thai takeout and a bottle of wine. The apartment was a sublet, a favor from a friend in finance who was hiding out in the Hamptons to avoid an SEC subpoena, though Julian hadn't told Elena that part.
"I'm home," Julian called out,
forcing a cheerfulness he didn't feel. Elena was sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by boxes. She looked up, smiling, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Her hair was messy, and she was wearing one of Julian's oversized shirts. "Hey," she said, standing up to kiss him. "God, I'm starving. Packing took forever." The movers were idiots. "Did you see him?" Julian asked, setting the food down on a crate. He tried to sound casual, but his voice was tight. "Elias?" "No," Elena said. "I didn't go. I couldn't. It felt too cruel." "Cruel is staying in a marriage that's dead, Elle. You did him a favor," Julian said, pouring 2 large glasses. He took a long sip, the alcohol hitting his empty stomach with a pleasant burn. "Besides, he's probably relieved. He gets to wallow in his misery without having to apologize for it." Elena sat on the couch, a white leather sectional that looked great but was uncomfortable to sit on. "This place is amazing, Jules. The rent must be insane." Julian froze for a nanosecond, his fork hovering over the noodles. "Don't worry about the rent, babe. I closed a seed round for that biotech startup last week. We're golden." It was a lie. The seed round had fallen through. His credit cards were maxed out. He was leveraging debt to pay debt, banking on a liquidity event that was months away. But he looked at Elena, beautiful, trophy-like Elena, and knew he had to keep the illusion spinning. Winning her from Elias wasn't about love, it was about winning, and winners didn't have cash flow problems. "We're going to have a great life," Julian said, leaning over to kiss her neck. "Next month, once the dust is settled, I'm booking us a trip to St. Bart's. Just you, me, and the ocean." Elena smiled, leaning into his touch. "St. Bart's. That sounds perfect." But as Julian kissed her, Elena's eyes drifted to the corner of the room where her old portfolio case sat. Inside was a photo of them and Elias from their honeymoon in a cheap motel in Maine. They had been poor, eating gas station sandwiches, but they had laughed until they couldn't breathe. She pushed the thought away. That was the past. This, the Tribeca loft, the venture capitalist boyfriend, and the promise of St. Bart's, this was the future she deserved. Back at the penthouse, Elias stood in the shower. The bathroom was the size of his old living room, clad in black marble and gold fixtures. The water pressure was punishingly strong, hot enough to turn his skin red. He scrubbed himself. He scrubbed away the scent of the Brooklyn loft. He scrubbed away the feeling of Elena's hand in his. He scrubbed away the Elias who apologized for taking up space. He stepped out, wrapping himself in a towel that was thicker than a winter coat. He walked into the bedroom. On the bedside table, his phone buzzed. He picked it up. It was a notification from his bank app. The transfer from the trust had been initiated. A pending deposit. Current balance, $500 million. Status, pending, 27 days remaining. Elias stared at the zeros. They looked like open mouths, screaming silently. He opened his contact list, scrolled to Elena. His thumb hovered over the delete button. For a moment, he hesitated. A wave of nausea hit him, the finality of it. If he did this, there was no going back. He was cutting the anchor. He pressed delete. He scrolled to a Julian. He didn't hesitate this time. Delete. Elias Thorne tossed the phone onto the bed. He walked to the window, naked, looking out at the city that was now his playground, his battlefield, and his hiding place. "Okay," he whispered to the reflection in the glass. "Let's see who I am when I'm not nobody." 6 months is a lifetime in New York City. In that span, skyscrapers could rise from empty lots, fortunes could evaporate in the futures market, and love could turn into a negotiation. Elias Thorne stood on the steel skeleton of what would soon be the Thorne Art Center in the meatpacking district. The wind off the Hudson River was biting, carrying the salt of the Atlantic and the grit of the city. But Elias didn't flinch. He wore a charcoal cashmere overcoat that cost more than his old car, and his hair, once shaggy and apologetic, was now cut with severe precision. The cantilever is off by 3 inches, Mr. Russo, Elias said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the roar of the rivet guns and the shouting of the foreman. Russo, the lead contractor, a man who had been bullying architects since the 80s, shifted uncomfortably. He adjusted his hard hat. Look, Mr. Thorne, the steel's settled. It's structural physics. We can shim it, clad it in aluminum. No one will see the line. He turned slowly to look at him. His eyes were cold, devoid of the nervous energy that used to plague him. I will see the line. The physics didn't change, Russo. Your team's precision did. Tear it down. Tear it down? Russo sputtered. That's a 2-week delay. That's $100,000 in labor. I don't care about the money, Elias said. And for the first time in his life, it was the absolute truth. I care about the integrity of the edge. Tear it down, or I find a crew that can read a blueprint. He turned and walked away, his Italian leather boots making a sharp, rhythmic sound on the metal grating. He didn't wait for Russo's answer. He knew the work would be done. 6 months ago, Elias would have compromised. He would have worried about the budget, about being liked, about making waves. But the Elias who had inherited Silas Thorne's empire and the solitude that came with it didn't compromise. He had spent the last half year systematically acquiring the firm he used to work for, rebranding it, and launching projects that were aggressive, brutalist, and undeniably brilliant. He got into the back of his waiting town car. As the door closed, sealing him in the silence, he checked his phone. No messages. Not personal ones, anyway. Just approvals from the trust, requests for interviews, all declined, and updates on his investment portfolio. He was the most eligible bachelor in Manhattan, a mystery billionaire, according to the tabloids that hadn't yet connected the dots to his past life. He was powerful, he was respected, and he was profoundly, surgically alone. 3 miles south, in the Tribeca loft, the air was thick with a different kind of tension. Elena sat at the kitchen island, a slab of imported marble that was already stained with red wine rings. She was scrolling through Instagram, her thumb moving in a rhythmic, numbing swipe. "Did you pay the Amex?" she asked, not looking up. Julian was on the balcony, pacing. He had a phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing wildly at the skyline. He was wearing a robe at 11 a.m. His hair was thinning slightly at the temples, something Elena hadn't noticed 6 months ago. He tapped on the glass door and slid it open, ending the call with a curse. "What?" "The Amex," Elena repeated, looking at him. "My card was declined at Pilates this morning. It was embarrassing, Julian. The instructor had to put it on my tab." "It's a fraud alert," Julian said quickly, too quickly. He walked to the fridge, pulling out a bottle of kombucha. "I moved some capital around for the Series B funding. The bank's algorithms got twitchy. I'll call them."
Elena watched him. She knew the look of a lie now. She had seen it on her own face in the mirror for the last year of her marriage to Elias. "You said the funding closed last month," she said, her voice flat. "It did. It's just liquidity, Elle. Cash flow versus assets. You know how this works." Julian snapped the cap off the bottle aggressively. "Why are you grilling me? I'm dealing with a lot right now. The market is volatile." "I'm not grilling you," Elena said, standing up. "I'm just tired. We haven't been out to dinner in 2 weeks. You canceled St. Bart's because of work, and now my card is declined." "I'm building an empire here, Elena," Julian shouted, the charm finally fracturing. "It takes sacrifice. You didn't seem to mind the sacrifice when you were bored to death with Elias and his coupon clipping." The name hung in the room. Elias. They rarely spoke of him. When they did, it was usually Julian mocking him to make himself feel bigger. But lately, the mockery had lost its teeth. Elena walked to the window. The view was still beautiful, but the novelty had worn off. She realized now that the excitement she had craved was mostly just anxiety disguised as adrenaline. "I looked him up the other day,"
Elena said softly. Who? Elias. I tried to find him. His Facebook is gone, his LinkedIn is dead. It's like he evaporated. Good, Julian sneered, though his eyes darted nervously to his laptop screen where a mounting debt spreadsheet was open. He probably moved back to Ohio or wherever, found some nice, boring librarian to knit him sweaters. No, Elena whispered. She remembered the look in Elias's eyes the day he signed the papers. It wasn't the look of a defeated man. It was the look of a man who had decided to stop playing a game he didn't like. Forget him, Julian said, coming up behind her. He wrapped his arms around her, but his touch felt possessive, heavy. We're building an empire here, Elena. It takes sacrifice. You didn't seem to mind the sacrifice when you were bored to death with Elias and his coupon clipping. The name hung in the room. Elias. They rarely spoke of him. When they did, it was usually Julian mocking him to make himself feel bigger. But lately, the mockery had lost its teeth. Elena walked to the window. The view was still beautiful, but the novelty had worn off. She realized now that the excitement she had craved was mostly just anxiety disguised as adrenaline. Okay, she said quietly. The gala. Later that evening, in the penthouse library, Elias sat across from Arthur Vance. The guest list is finalized, Vance said, placing a thick, cream-colored envelope on the desk. 600 guests, the mayor, the governor, the entire board of the Arts Council. Elias picked up the invitation. It was heavy, embossed with gold leaf. The Thorn Foundation cordially invites you to the annual Winter Gala, honoring the legacy of Silas Thorn. Introducing the new chairman, Elias Thorn. Are you ready for this? Vance asked. Once you step onto that stage, the quiet period is officially over. The world will know, the press will know. And they will know, Elias asked, tapping a specific name on the guest list manifest on his iPad. Vance peered at the screen. Mr. Julian Banks and guest. They bought a table, Vance said with a hint of a dry smile on his lips. Zone C, near the kitchen doors. But yes, they will be there. Elias stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the city, his reflection ghosting against the glass. He didn't feel malicious. He didn't feel the hot red urge for revenge that he had expected. He felt something colder. He felt like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict. Let them come, Elias said. I want them to see what they threw away. And if she tries to speak to you? Vance asked. Elias buttoned his jacket. She can try, but she'll find that Elias the architect doesn't live here anymore. He turned off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness, save for the city lights that crowned him in a halo of electric gold. Send the invites, Arthur. Let's have a party. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a universe of gold leaf and crystal, suspended above the grim reality of the city streets. It was the kind of room where the air itself smelled of money, a blend of expensive perfume, florist-grade lilies, and the metallic tang of chilled champagne. Elena walked into the room on Julian's arm, fighting the urge to shiver. It wasn't the temperature. It was the atmosphere. She wore the black gown Julian had insisted upon, a sleek backless number that she had charged to a credit card she prayed wouldn't bounce. Beside her, Julian was vibrating with a manic energy that passed for charisma only to those who didn't know him. Shoulders back, Al, Julian hissed under his breath, his smile fixed in a rictus of charm as he scanned the room for targets. I see the vice president of Morgan Stanley over there. And is that? Yes, that's the senator. We need to work the room before dinner starts. I'm just going to find our table, Elena said, pulling her arm away gently. She felt brittle, like dried parchment. Fine, but don't hide. We're here to be seen, Julian said, already drifting away toward a cluster of men in tuxedos, his hand extended, his desperation hidden behind a layer of bronzer. Elena navigated the sea of tables. The centerpieces were towering arrangements of white orchids that probably cost more than her first car. She checked her ticket, table 42. She walked past the stage, past the prime tables in the center where the billionaires sat, past the politicians, until she reached the back of the room. Table 42 was near the service doors. The waiters rushed past with trays of hors d'oeuvres, the draft from the kitchen swinging the door open every few seconds. She sat down, feeling small. The other guests at the table were minor donors, a dentist from Jersey, a frantic event planner. People who had paid for the privilege of breathing the same air as the titans up front. Quite a turnout, the dentist said, nodding at her. They say the new chairman is going to announce the trust's new direction tonight. $500 million in assets. Can you imagine? Alina froze, her hand tightening around the stem of her water glass. $500 million? That's the rumor, the man chuckled. Silas Thorne's entire estate. It's been locked up in probate or something for 6 months. Tonight's the unveiling. Alina felt a cold stone settle in her stomach. Thorne. The name she had legally shed 6 months ago. But Elias had nothing to do with this world. Elias was probably in a cramped apartment in Queens, drawing blueprints for parking garages. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. A hush descended over the 600 guests, broken only by the clinking of silverware. A spotlight hit the stage. Arthur Vance walked out to the podium. He looked dignified, a gatekeeper of secrets. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice booming through the surround sound. "For decades, the Thorne Foundation has been a pillar of this city's skyline. We lost a giant in this year in Silas Thorne, but a legacy is not built on the past. It is built on the future." Alina watched, bored. She looked for Julian. He was standing near the bar, blocked from the VIP section by a velvet rope and a stern security guard. He looked frustrated. "Tonight," Vance continued, "marks the end of the transition period. It is my distinct honor to introduce the sole heir to the Thorne estate, the owner of Thorne Enterprises, and the new chairman of the foundation. A man who has quietly restructured our vision with a precision and boldness that rivals his father." The orchestra swelled, a low and dramatic chord. "Please welcome Mr. Elias Thorne." The name hung in the air for a fraction of a second before the applause broke out. Alina stopped breathing. The sound of the clapping seemed to come from underwater. Elias? The curtain behind the podium parted. A man stepped into the spotlight.
He was tall, wearing a midnight blue tuxedo that fit him with architectural perfection. His hair was styled back, sharp and clean. He walked with a predator's grace, slow, deliberate, unbothered by the blinding lights. It was Elias, but it wasn't her Elias. This wasn't the man who wore wrinkled flannels and apologized for burning the toast. This wasn't the man who looked at the floor when he spoke. This man looked out at the sea of faces with eyes that were hard, clear, and utterly commanding. He owned the room. He owned the building. Elena rose halfway out of her chair, her legs trembling. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not..." On the monitors flanking the stage, his face was magnified in high definition. There was no mistake. The jawline she used to kiss, the eyes she used to find dull, now they burned with a cold intelligence. Elias gripped the podium. He didn't smile. He let the applause die down until the silence was absolute. "Thank you," Elias said. His voice was deeper, resonant. "For a long time, this family has been known for accumulation. We built towers to look down on the world." He paused, scanning the crowd. His gaze swept across the room. For a terrifying second, Elena felt his eyes brush past table 42, past the kitchen doors, past her insignificance. He didn't stop. He didn't register her. She was part of the background noise. "That ends tonight," Elias continued. "The Thorne Trust is liquidating $200 million of commercial assets to fund urban renewal and public housing architecture. We are not just building for the elite anymore. We are building for the city." A gasp went through the room. Shock at the amount, shock at the direction. Then thunderous applause. He was a visionary. He was a saint. He was richer than God. Elena sank back into her chair. The numbers swirled in her head. 200 million? $500 million? She looked toward the bar. Julian had turned around. He was staring at the stage, his mouth slightly open, his face draining of color. He dropped his wine glass. It shattered on the marble floor, splashing red liquid onto his shoes. No one moved to help him. They were too busy looking at Elias. Julian looked at the stage, then he looked frantically across the room until he found Elena. His eyes were wide with panic. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The dead weight he had convinced her to drop was the most powerful man in the room. Elias finished his speech. "Enjoy the evening, and remember, legacy is not what you leave in the bank, it's what you build." He stepped back from the podium, accepting a handshake from the mayor. Elena felt nausea rising in her throat. She looked down at her hands, the hands that had signed the divorce papers for $40,000. She had walked away from $500 million. But worse than that, looking at the man on stage, confident, brilliant, beautiful, she realized she hadn't just walked away from the money. She had walked away from a man she had never bothered to truly see. And now he was shining so brightly that he blinded her. "He knew," she whispered to the empty air. "He knew the whole time." Julian appeared at her side, breathless, sweating. He grabbed her arm, his grip painful. "Did you know?" Julian hissed, his voice cracking. "Elena, tell me you knew." "I didn't," I stammered, tears pricking her eyes. "He never—" "We have to fix this," Julian snapped, his eyes darting around wildly. The veneer of the venture capitalist was gone. He was just a desperate grifter who had bet on the wrong horse. "He's your husband, ex-husband, whatever. You have an in. We can go say hello, congratulate him." "Julian, no. We have to." Julian snapped. "Do you know what he could do for me, for us? Get up." He yanked her up. Elena stumbled, her heels wobbling. She looked at the stage where Elias was surrounded by admirers, a king holding court. "He won't talk to us, Julian," Elena said, a sob catching in her chest. "Watch me," Julian said, dragging her toward the VIP cordon. Elena let herself be pulled, feeling like a ghost being dragged toward the sun. She knew with a sickening certainty that they were about to burn. The distance between the back of the ballroom and the VIP section was less than 50 yards, but to Elena, it felt like crossing a minefield. Julian gripped her elbow with a force that bruised, steering her through the crowd. His palm was damp against her skin. He was muttering to himself, half-formed strategies, manic reassurances. "It's fine. We are family. We have history. He can't just erase history." Elena stumbled slightly as her heel caught on the edge of a carpet, but Julian yanked her upright without breaking stride. She looked at his profile. The jaw she used to think was strong now looked clenched in panic. The eyes she thought were piercing were now just darting, desperate, searching for a lifeline. They reached the velvet rope guarding the inner sanctum. A large man with an earpiece stepped in front of them, his face a wall of professional indifference. "Invitation only beyond this point, sir," the guard said. "I know the chairman," Julian snapped, his voice too loud, cracking with a shrill edge that turned heads at nearby tables. "We went to Yale together. I'm his oldest friend. Tell him Julian is here, and his wife." "Ex-wife," Elena whispered, the correction slipping out involuntarily. The guard didn't blink. "The chairman is currently engaged." "Engaged?" Julian laughed, a frantic, breathless sound. "He's standing right there. Elias!" Julian waved his free arm over the guard's shoulder. On the raised dais, amidst a circle of admirers, including the governor, Elias paused. He didn't turn immediately. He finished his sentence, took a sip of sparkling water, and then, with agonizing slowness, shifted his gaze. His eyes found them. There was no shock in his expression, no anger. He looked at Julian, waving frantically, and Elena shrinking into herself with the same dispassionate, clinical interest one might show a specimen behind glass. Elias said something to the guard. The large man stepped aside, unhooking the velvet rope. "He'll see you," the guard said. Julian pulled Elena forward. "See? I told you. He needs us. He's probably surrounded by sharks. He needs people he can trust." They stepped into the circle of light. The air here was different, cooler, quieter. The conversations around Elias died down as the guests sensed the intrusion. Elias handed his glass to a waiter and turned to face them fully. Up close, the transformation was even more terrifying. The slump in his shoulders was gone. The hesitation was gone. He stood with the easy, terrifying stillness of a man who owns the ground beneath his feet. "Hello, Julian," Elias said. His voice was smooth, polished, stripping away the nickname. He looked at Elena. "Elena?" "Elias," Julian breathed out, stepping forward with his hand extended, a wide, trembling smile plastered on his face. "My God, look at you. The stealth play. You son of a gun. You had us all fooled. I was just telling Elle, this is the smartest thing I've ever seen. Keeping it under wraps. Genius." Elias didn't take the hand. He let Julian's arm hang in the air, extended into the void, until Julian awkwardly dropped it to his side. "It wasn't a play, Julian," Elias said quietly. "It was a mourning period." Right, of course," Julian stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "Silas, a tragedy. But look at this legacy. You're the king of New York tonight, Eli, and we're just so proud of you." "Proud?" Elias repeated the word as if testing its weight. He looked at Elena. Elena couldn't hold his gaze. She looked at his lapel pin, a small golden architectural compass. "Elias, Her voice failed her. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Tell you?" Elias tilted his head slightly. "About the money," she whispered, tears spilling over. "About all of this. We were struggling. We were talking about the future, and you let me believe we had nothing." "I didn't let you believe we had nothing, Elena. I let you believe I was nothing, and that was enough for you to leave." "It wasn't like that," she sobbed, reaching out to touch his sleeve. "I was scared. I felt like we were drowning." "You weren't drowning, Elena. You were bored. There is a difference." He turned his eyes back to Julian, who was shifting from foot to foot.
"Elias, listen," Julian interjected. Sensing the emotional appeal was failing, he lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Water under the bridge, right? Relationships are messy, but business is rational. I have a liquidity issue with the fund, just a temporary hiccup. With your capital backing, we could dominate the biotech sector. I have the prospectus in my car. If you just stop," Elias said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command. Soft, but absolute. "I know about the fund, Julian," Elias said. "I know about the Series B failure. I know about the fraud alert on your accounts. I know you're leveraging debt to pay the rent on a Tribeca loft you can't afford." Julian went pale. How do you... "I own the bank that holds your debt," Elias said simply. "I acquired the portfolio last week." The silence that followed was deafening. The background noise of the gala, the clinking glasses, the laughter, seemed to vanish, leaving only the sound of Julian's ragged breathing.
You own my debt? Julian whispered. I do, and I have no intention of refinancing it. Elias looked at them both. He didn't look triumphant. He looked tired of the sight of them. I read the messages, Elias said. Elena froze. What? The iPad. The morning you left, you forgot it on the counter. Dead weight. That's what you called me, isn't it, Julian? And you, Elena, you said you wanted a real man. He gestured around the room, at the opulence, at the power, at the life he had built from the ashes of their betrayal. I hope you found what you were looking for, because I certainly did. Elias, please, Elena wept, the reality of her mistake crushing her chest. I made a mistake. I was confused. I still love you. We can fix this. We can start over. You're my husband. I was your husband, Elias corrected. Now, I'm just the man who signed the check for your freedom. You wanted out, Elena. You got out. Don't ask for the key back just because you realize the room you walked into is empty. He checked his watch, the same Patek Philippe his father had worn, now resting on his wrist. Marcus, Elias said, not looking away from them. The house manager appeared instantly at his elbow, as if materialized from the shadows. Mr. Thorne? My guests are leaving, Elias said. Please ensure they find their way to the exit. And Marcus, make sure their names are on the permanent exclusion list for all Foundation properties. Immediately, sir. Elias, you can't do this, Julian shouted, his dignity finally snapping. I'm your best friend. You owe me. You were a loser, Elias. You were nothing without me. People were staring now. The governor stopped talking. The security guards closed in. Elias turned his back on them. He didn't flinch at the insults. He simply adjusted his cuffs and turned toward the woman standing next to the governor, a renowned urban planner he had been eager to meet. I apologize for the interruption, Elias said to her, his voice calm, warm, and utterly composed. Old acquaintances. We were just discussing the blueprints for the Bronx project. Behind him, the sound of Julian screaming his name was cut off as the heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung shut, sealing the past outside where it belonged. Elena stood in the hallway, the music from the party muffled behind the doors. She looked at Julian, who was hyperventilating, clutching his chest. She looked at the empty corridor. She realized then that the silence Elias had lived in for years wasn't a prison. It was a sanctuary. And now she was the one on the outside, screaming at the walls.
The silence inside the Rolls-Royce Phantom was different from the silence Elias had lived with for years. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating quiet of a marriage dying in a Brooklyn loft, nor was it the cold, imposing hush of his father's library. This was a clean silence. It was the silence of a vacuum after a storm, where the air has been scrubbed of dust and static. Elias sat in the back seat, watching the city streak by in ribbons of neon and sodium vapor. Beside him, Arthur Vance was reviewing a digital file on a tablet, the blue light illuminating his craggy features. "We have a situation with the press," Vance murmured, not looking up. "Page 6 is already running the headline, 'The Billionaire in the Shadows.' They have photos of the confrontation. Julian is being painted as a crasher, a desperate hanger-on." Elias turned his gaze from the window. "And Elena?" "Collateral damage," Vance said, finally closing the tablet cover with a soft snap. "The narrative is already forming. You are the aggrieved genius, they are the opportunistic past. The public loves a redemption arc, Elias, especially one that comes with a 10-figure balance sheet." Elias looked back out the window. The car was idling at a red light on 57th Street. On the corner, under the harsh glare of a drugstore sign, two figures were standing. It was a coincidence of New York geography. The city was vast, but its circles were small. It was them. Julian was gesturing wildly, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, his tie loose. He was shouting at Elena.
Elena was standing with her arms wrapped around herself, shivering in her backless gown, her mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks. She looked smaller than Elias had ever seen her. She looked like a child lost in a department store. Julian pointed a finger in her face, blaming her, no doubt, for the catastrophe of the evening. Elena turned away, covering her face with her hands. They were waiting for an Uber or a taxi or a miracle that wasn't coming. "Sir?" The driver's voice came through the intercom. "Do you want me to engage the privacy tint?" Elias watched them. He remembered the way Elena used to laugh when he made coffee in the morning. He remembered the way Julian used to clap him on the back and call him brother. He searched his chest for the anger he thought should be there. He searched for satisfaction. He searched for the vindictive joy of seeing them broken. He found nothing. It was a vast, hollow indifference. They weren't villains in a story anymore. They were just people. Flawed, greedy, short-sighted people who had made a bet and lost. They were strangers. "No," Elias said to the driver. "Just drive. The light is green." The car surged forward. For a brief second, as they passed, Elena looked up. She saw the car. She saw Elias's silhouette in the window. Her hand lifted, half a wave, half a plea. Elias didn't blink. He didn't turn his head. He kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, on the dark outline of the buildings ahead. The car accelerated, leaving them behind on the concrete island, shrinking in the rear-view mirror until they were just two specks of dust in the city's infinite grind. The next morning, the sun hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse with a blinding clarity. Elias woke up at 6 a.m. without an alarm. He showered, dressed in a simple black turtleneck and slacks, and walked into the kitchen. The staff hadn't arrived yet. The house was his. He made his own coffee. The machine hissed and gurgled, a domestic sound that felt grounding in the cavernous space.
He took the mug and walked to the balcony. The air was crisp, carrying the promise of winter. Below him, Central Park was a rectangle of brown and fading green, surrounded by the gray fortress of the city. He pulled his phone from his pocket. He had one final piece of business to conclude. He opened the banking app. He navigated to the debt portfolio of Banks Venture Capital. The loan that Julian had taken out, the one he was drowning in, was now technically an asset of the Thorn Foundation. Elias could call the loan. He could bankrupt Julian by noon. He could seize the Tribeca loft, the car, the watch, everything. He could sue Elena for the legal fees of the divorce. He could spend the next year twisting the knife. His thumb hovered over the accelerate debt option. He thought about his father. Silas Thorn would have pushed the button. Silas would have destroyed them, salted the earth, and framed the foreclosure notice on his wall. That was the Thorn legacy, domination. But Elias wasn't Silas. He realized now that holding on to the debt meant holding on to them. It meant keeping a tether attached to his ankle, dragging their corpses along with him into his future. Revenge was just another form of intimacy. It required attention. It required energy. Elias didn't want to punish them. He wanted to be free of them. He navigated to the forgive menu. It wasn't mercy. It was an eviction. He topped write off asset. Confirm? Yes. Transaction complete. He had just burned $2 million of his own money to erase them from his ledger. Julian would wake up to find his debt gone, but his reputation destroyed. He would live, but he would live knowing that he wasn't even worth killing. He was a rounding error that Elias had corrected. Elias put the phone down on the railing. He felt a physical weight lift from his shoulders, lighter than he had felt in years. "Mr. Thorn?" Elias turned. Marcus stood in the doorway, holding a fresh-pressed suit. "The board meeting is at 9, sir. The architects for the Bronx project are waiting." "Thank you, Marcus." I said, "Burn the suit." Marcus blinked, his professional mask slipping for a fraction of a second. "The suit," Elias said, gesturing to the gray wool garment Marcus was holding, one of his old father's favorites. "And the rest of them, in the closet. Send them to Goodwill or burn them, I don't care." "And what will you be wearing, sir?" Elias smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached his eyes.
I'm wearing this. And Marcus, call the real estate agent. Put the penthouse on the market. You're selling, sir? But this is the Thorn seat. It's an Elysium, Elias said, picking up his coffee cup. I'm an architect. I don't live in museums. I build homes. He walked past the stunned house manager, moving with a purposeful stride toward the elevator. Elias stepped into the lift and pressed the button for the lobby. As the door slid shut, cutting off the view of the gilded cage he had just unlocked, he caught his reflection in the polished metal. He didn't see a victim. He didn't see a billionaire heir. He saw Elias. The doors closed and the elevator began its smooth, rapid descent, not down into the dark, but down into the world where he would finally, truly begin to live.